Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, the 2026 predictions for AI and enterprise IT operations. Today, we're going to be discussing what's going on, what's shifting, and what teams need to be thinking about right now as they think about their agentic AI strategies, as they look to deploy that with greater confidence in 2026. Today, we have Assaf Resnick, our founder and CEO, as well as Jason Walker, our CIO, moderated by yours truly. I'm Adam Blau, VP of Product Marketing. And we're going to walk through 5 predictions that we've been developing based on how we're seeing the market with our customers. And before we get into it, Assaf, I thought maybe for audience members who are not familiar with BigPanda, could you introduce the company a little bit and what we're working on to frame the predictions that we're about to state?
Happy to. BigPanda is in the space of agentic IT operations. So think of IT operations, that's the men and women who keep the digital world, the digital economy running. So think of your typical Fortune 500, Global 2000 large enterprise, lots of applications and networks and clouds and storage, microservices, lots of moving parts that are the underpinning for the digital services that run the economy. IT operations are those folks that have to keep all those moving parts working like they should. And the challenge is, as enterprises have evolved over the last decade or so to cloud native environments, there's just a lot more moving parts, a lot more scale, a lot more data, a lot more pace of change. And the size of the amount of the data and moving parts that humans need to understand and consume and manage have really just, scaled beyond the limits of human scalability. Luckily, agentic AI comes along and can actually automate a lot of that reasoning-based work. And so we're in the business of taking that $250 billion worth of spend that enterprises spend every year on IT operations and bringing agentic automation to that vertical.
Awesome. Great. Very helpful. I think that provides a really strong context for today's conversation around agentic AI and how companies are seeing value and how they're embracing this new paradigm to automate many of those manual human-driven workflows that were previously unattainable, that companies couldn't use with rules-based automations. And so to kick it off in our first kind of prediction, I wanted to kind of set the stage that, in the past couple of years, we've been hearing a lot of noise about which AI model is best. First, it was OpenAI, now Claude is getting all the attention. And then, companies who had Azure were looking at, Azure-based OpenAI. And a lot of enterprises have made big bets on picking the right solution. But Assaf and Jason, when you look at where AI is actually delivering value versus where it's falling flat, they keep coming back to something. Assaf, could you share what you're seeing and what your prediction here around why context becomes the moat?
Yeah, sure. So, if you think of what's been happening over the last 18 months or so, is you've had this kind of really intense competition at the large language model layer. And so you have the frontier models like OpenAI and Anthropic and several others that are in a horse race. And for the enterprises that are the customers of those models, that's actually really good news, because it means that there is a fairly commoditizing effect at the large language, at the LLM layer, where there's a lot of vendors you can choose from. Certain vendors will have the advantage one month and someone else will leapfrog them the next month. And all of those are fairly equitable price points and very approachable in terms of being able to use them quite easily and leverage them for enterprise workloads. And so that means that the AI layer, the LLM layer, is fairly commoditized, and you have several great choices to work from. And so then, enterprises, when they're thinking of, how do I stand out? How do I compete against my competitors? And what competitive advantage can I bring to the table? It's really not around the AI vendor you're choosing to use. It's around the data, the knowledge, the context that you're bringing to the table for use by that AI. Think about it in human terms. What do you need to succeed from your workforce? You need to have really, really good, smart, hungry employees. And then you need to give them the tools, the data, the knowledge to succeed. You wouldn't hire an employee in IT operations, but give them access to a very, very small amount of data and knowledge in which to make decisions. No, what you would want to do is to say, hey, human, we have a lot of, we're a large enterprise. We have knowledge across many, many different silos and tools and teams across our enterprise. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to quickly get, depending on the situation you're handling in IT operations, when you have an incident, we want to be able to get you to quickly get all the data and the context you need to get situational awareness and make smart decisions. And so the same thing goes in this age of AI. It's all around how do you create an AI native knowledge strategy. Think of the data strategy that enterprises and IT operations have been using for the last 30 years. They've been trying to automate. The automation has been based on very static rules that were built by hand, and those static rules needed really, really highly structured data to make decisions. If you gave it unstructured data, well, those simplistic algorithms or rules would break down. And so you had, this kind of data strategy built around a CMDB, which is a very small amount of very highly structured data living inside of a configuration management database. Well, now we've moved from rules-based automation to reasoning-based automation, where AI can actually make very complex reasoning-based decisions. But to do that well, it needs access to the wide array of data that you have in your enterprise footprint. Not just what fits into your CMDB, but lots of context around what's broken, who owns it, what's the impact of this issue, has this happened before, and that data lives in many, many, many different silos across your organization. And the large majority of it is not structured. So for enterprises to really maximize the leverage they're getting out of AI, you really need to focus on bringing all that disparate, fragmented context into a single place, not into a single unified database, but into a IT knowledge graph or layer where all of that different context is accessible by those AI models. And the companies that do that best, that really think through, how do I shift from a traditional IT data strategy to an AI native knowledge strategy, those are the ones that are going to accrue outstanding results.
Yeah. And Jason, to follow up what Assaf just mentioned, is that kind of like the gap that enterprises are experiencing between what they were promised and what they see in actual deployment?
Yeah, I'd say I think back to the time when, Microsoft was including its Copilot with, every subscription that they sold to enterprise, and people got a hold of those first LLM models, and it was like taking someone off the street, very, very intelligent someone, and putting them in your organization and then asking questions about how work happens and what should I do here. And what were they missing? They were missing context. It was like a genius intern that you brought into your organization that did incredibly well in school and could pass all the tests very well, but had zero knowledge about how your org actually works and what processes, what tools, what does what, who does what. All those things are a fundamental layer of context that AI requires to do anything useful. You can't just take somebody, and for me, it was really a realization that bringing AI into your org is like bringing in a new employee. You have to give them context. Fortunately, they can read very quickly and they can absorb information very quickly. But to the organization that's transferring from kind of a rules-based system to an AI-based system, they suddenly realized that all of the people that did the configuring of, let's say, event management, tagging, and correlation patterns, all the people that set up all of those rules, all those systems, all those processes, all of that SaaS configuration, they had an incredible amount of context to do that. And now we need to take that and convert it into something that an AI can easily access on demand to do anything in the enterprise. And that's really a two-way challenge. One, if you're building an AI solution, you have to embed in it a means to gather that context and build it and change it over time because every organization is evolving. And two, the organization, that large enterprise, they have a million and one safeguards and security and data compliance issues um, that have all been built around people. Like the context came with the people, not necessarily with their CMDB or other systems. So they've created barriers to getting context through their processes that really they're going to have to overcome that. And we see that, you know, left, right, and center that they're coming along to the fact that, well, if we want to take advantage of AI and AI native solutions, we're going to have to open up the gates a little bit and share some of what makes our organization tick in terms of the data and systems and people and processes and make that available to those AIs.
I think that's a great tee up to the next prediction. I mean, you guys, you and Assaf just really did a great job of explaining what makes AI valuable in the enterprise, but it kind of leads to an uncomfortable conversation because that same valuable context is becoming a source of competition. We've heard of major platform players removing access to data, removing access to that context. And it's not always in favor of the buyer. Jason, can you flag this as part of our kind of conversations and something that enterprises need to be aware of? Can you set the scene for us?
Absolutely. And I take it a little personally, to be honest, because when you run IT operations every day, you have your teams that are running incidents, they're going through, they're making decisions, and they're putting data into a ticket or into a chat thread. And they're putting all of their decision traces, all the things that they with their human context use to keep services running. Now, when you bring an AI into that equation, many of these vendors are gating access to that data. They're saying you can't have access to your own tickets that you filled out every field and put in all the comments and work notes. You put that root cause analysis in there. You did all the hard work, all the heavy lifting of deciding what's going to go into these systems. Um, and now I'm going to charge you, or I'm going to prevent you from extracting it so that you can train an agent to go make decisions on your behalf so you can keep services running. So that tension is huge right now, I think, for organizations that have spent years in some cases, putting data into an ITSM or having millions of chat conversations. And now there's a wall around all of that data that they can't bring it into, let's say, a context graph or an IT knowledge graph and make it accessible to AI. And that's a big challenge because I think what those vendors are realizing is that that data is gold. It is absolutely a ton of organizational value trapped in there, and they have to figure out a way to make that accessible to AI for their own products and for all the other AI agents that are coming in and kind of collapsing the functional environment in these enterprises.
Mhm. And Asaf, what would you tell an IT leader who hasn't thought about this? I think Jason laid out the scene of what's happening, but it may not always be clear, or they might be kind of focusing on less tools and centralizing. But how would you kind of frame the perspective that might help them in making a really smart decision?
I'd start by putting myself, understanding, what are my vendors going through, my strategic vendors going through, and then, understand, what is their motivation, and then understand, what do I do about it? So if I'm a large SaaS vendor, right? My business is under a lot of pressure. We've all seen what's happening in the stock market over the last few weeks and months to SaaS vendors, as there's a lot of fear that AI is going to disrupt a lot of these SaaS platforms, and it will, because these SaaS platforms at a very, very high level, there are a series of algorithms on top of a database. And so what's happening is AI is coming and saying, hey, all those kind of rules and simplistic algorithms are yesterday's news, because with AI reasoning, you can now, do way, way better and really push the boundaries of what you can automate with intelligence. And so, that's putting the SaaS vendors under a lot of pressure. And how are they responding to that? By trying to innovate themselves and be the ones disrupting themselves with cutting edge AI. Some will be successful and some will not. That's a really hard challenge, because the pace of innovation coming out of Silicon Valley is just insane. It's the highest it's ever been. And so for a large vendor that's playing defense versus a bunch of startups that are playing offense, that innovation layer has both a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges. Then, so the second wall of defense is, hey, how do I put up a moat around this data layer, my database, and not give access to all these startups that want to use, quote unquote, my data to power their agents. Now, the problem is it's not their data, it's the customer's data. So if you're a large enterprise and you've spent the last 20 years putting, all of your CRM or your ITSM or whatever SaaS data into this large platform, you've done it under the assumption that, hey, this is a platform and it's going to have an open ecosystem that plays nicely with all the third-party vendors and all the home-based solutions I want to work with. Well, now these vendors are under threat and they're circling the wagons and they're saying, hey, I want to close up the moat around my business. And part of that moat around my business is all this customer data that lives inside of my four walls. And so you've seen moves by these large platforms to deprecate much of the access they give to the external ecosystem, especially to agentic players. So that's, and that may be the smart move if you're a large SaaS vendor, is to play defense. Now, if you're a customer, though, that's exactly the opposite of what you want. When you hire a new human into IT operations, you wouldn't stand for some large strategic platform saying, hey, these set of humans can have access to your data, but these set of humans cannot. And if you think through what is an agent is basically an AI intelligence that's in many ways doing the work of a human. And these large platforms are saying, hey, for these types of agents, the ones that we sell you, we'll give it all the access to your data. But for these external agents, for third parties that we deem threatening or competitive, we won't. And so that's really taking the agency and the ownership of the data out of the hands of the customers and into the hands of the strategic vendor who wants to keep everything in their walled garden. And so what's an executive to do is to make sure that when you're, signing or renegotiating contracts with any vendor, that you understand that is in context is your moat, not their moat. It belongs to the customer, not to the vendor. And you want to make sure that any agent you bring, whether you build it yourself or buy it from any party, has access to all the data across all your walled gardens, and not be stuck to using certain agents in certain walled gardens. And so you want to make sure that as you're negotiating contracts, you're really making sure that you have maximum data extensibility. Mm-hmm. Cool. And don't let any one vendor box you in.
100%. Yeah, I think we're seeing that also with our own customers, thinking about their context and knowledge strategy and making sure it's applicable to other systems they connect with. And this is kind of spurring a lot of investment, which leads us to our next prediction around more buying, less building. We're hearing a ton about investment going into AI, from the hyperscalers to investments in AI and agentic workflows. but we're seeing a shift happen in terms of how enterprises are approaching it from a buy versus a build. Assaf, can you share a little bit about what you think is driving that, not transformation, but a rethink of how they're thinking about getting value from agentic AI from building versus.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, with every technology wave over the last few decades, there's always kind of a parallel wave of, hey, there's some really new technology that unlocks a whole bunch of new capabilities. I want to use that to build internally a bunch of really cool capabilities versus, hey, there's all sorts of vendors that are offering new things. And usually, with every wave, there's a lot of excitement, and people, engineers within a large enterprise want to, take it for a test drive and build a lot of the new things themselves. And then you start getting an ROI based analysis of, wait, which of the things that we're building are actually really close to our core competence versus which of the things that we're building are really far away from our core competencies. And in fact, there's vendors out there that's all they do all day long, and we should buy from them. And so I think we're in that middle of a cycle with AI where, when AI kind of exploded onto the scene 2 years ago, there was, and is a ton of excitement around the art of the possible. Hey, why am I paying all this money for a CRM? Or why am I paying all this money for, pick your application or service? I can just build it in-house with 2 engineers and 2 weeks later and save $2 million. And I think you saw a lot of cycles of doing that over the last 2 years. And what's come to light, and there was a very famous MIT study that came out a few months ago that showed that 95% of those projects ended up in failure, which is astonishing. 95% of the will build it in-house projects ended up in failure. Why? I think the answer is that building great products is really hard. And yes, AI is amazing new technology that has moved the art of the possible and enabled capabilities that, were science fiction a few years ago. But fundamentally, building great products is really hard. And so I think you're going to see that needle move back to more buying and less building, where a lot of enterprises are going to understand or starting to understand, hey, yes, there's a role in AI for us building things, but we should limit ourselves to the things that are in the core competence of our business and not start going on trying to rebuild everything under the sun. I think that MIT study was a real kind of splash of cold water to the industry. Didn't mean that AI is a bunch of fluff. I think it just means, the same thing it's meant for, the same rule of thumb that's been true since the dawn of business, which is it pays to focus on your core competencies and probably outsource everything else.
Mhm. Yeah, Jason, to build upon what Assaf just said, we hear about a lot of the news about, credible developer productivity using these tools that allow them to code at speeds that previously were unimaginable. I remember reading one company doesn't have anybody writing code. It's all being used via AI. So there must be IT leaders who are thinking, well, if these software companies can be so productive in developing their own tools, maybe I can as well. And we heard Assaf mention about staying within the core competencies, but is there a place where it makes sense to build versus buy? And what do you think the deciding factors are for that?
I think you're right. The new coding agents and testing agents and the whole kind of developer stack is getting transformed. And we see that with Claude Code, Cursor Code, Codo, all those tools that are basically there are even agents now that'll be a product manager for you.
Mhm.
And it's clear that there's a massive disruption happening. And so I think where does it make sense to build? I think at the grassroots level, you've got in large enterprises tons of engineers who have to come to grips with this destabilizing new technology that they don't understand yet because they've never had to use it before. And I think for them, building tools that they use themselves to do their job every day, a small agent here, a something that takes a very tedious task that they do and uses an AI with a little bit of context um, to help them, work in a new way. I think at that grassroots level, it's great because it gets familiarization. It builds something that is very important, which is appropriate trust in AI. This is not a omniscient, all-powerful new technology that's going to solve everyone's problems. It gets them familiarity with kind of how it works and what the inputs, outputs, constraints, capabilities, limitations are. And I think that in that sense, building is great because you know a lot of people at these large companies, they love to build, and there's something exciting about building a new tool. And I see it across some of our customers and some of the teams that I've worked with in the past. And they did this with cloud as well. Infrastructure engineers spun up VMs, and then they said, "Hey, what can I do with OpenStack or AWS?" But then after you go through that familiarization, you figure out kind of where to build and where not to build. And I think it for our development teams and across the entire kind of startup industry, there is an actual core capability there in building great products for enterprise. And I mean, put aside the enterprise readiness and security concerns for a moment. There's also just people that are outstanding designers. They iterate on building every day as their core function. They don't have another function that they're sharing that time with. And so who's going to win that race? The builders internal to a company that, let's say it's a retailer or financial services. They have a core capability. It's in financial services or retail. And they should iterate on that and getting brilliant at delivering that to their customers. I think there is it is incredibly exciting in Silicon Valley what people are coming up with every day, and they are iterating at a speed. The RPMs there are really lending themselves to eventually it's more of a buy decision because these solutions, as they mature, you're going to go through hundreds and hundreds of micro experiments across functions that are going to develop just great, great products that people are going to want to use over what they might be able to build internally.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. I think we talk a lot about like in the market and in the news about customers using these tools in order to have exponential productivity and efficiency gains. But then there's an application that we don't hear so much about in our space. It's also around thinking about service providers. So let's just go to the next slide. The next prediction is that service partners are going to be forced to reinvent their role. So I think this one is particularly relevant to many people in the audience, people who work with companies that help them manage their L1 or L1 knock. Assaf has talked about the role of context and the access to data and the ability to buy solutions that are custom built to automate a lot of these manual human-driven workflows that were then conducted and conducted by service providers. And now it kind of raises the real question is like, what happens to the people or firms that historically have done all these manual repetitive tasks? Assaf, maybe I could lead off with you. What does the service partner that thrives in 2026 look like in your mind versus one that doesn't?
I mean, it's one that understands what is the effect of agentic AI on the service provider ecosystem. And if you think of, GSIs, global system integrators, over the last 30, 40 years, outsourcing was a huge thing. So it's, hey, how do I take, in IT operations, how do I take a lot of that IT operations stack, especially the lower levels of the stack where I need more junior people to do more repetitive work, And how do I outsource that to service providers in low cost labor environments? And that's an industry that's, thrived over the past decades. I think that's going to be extremely disrupted by agentic AI. If you look at the application of agentic AI in many, many industries, from marketing to sales to legal to customer service, it really the agentic automation starts by bringing automation to the junior levels of those industries. And so junior marketers, junior sales development reps, junior legal experts are all under extreme pressure because a lot of that work is now being automated with AI. And when you look at IT operations and you look at L1 op centers, what used to be called network op centers, but now it's just op centers because they're full stack. My prediction is in the next 3 to 5 years, that whole layer will be completely automated with agentic AI. In fact, that's what we're doing as a business, is we're coming and saying, hey, agentic AI can do that work, better, cheaper, faster. And instead of having, employee attrition in many of these GSIs of, losing people every 7 months on average. So it's constant rotating door of junior people that have no context, that have no experience. You're bringing agentic AI that has full context and is getting smarter every single day, every single interaction it's learning. That's going to, I think, revolutionize the service provider industry. And so I think the smart GSIs will understand that that's coming and, reposition away from, less focus on providing outsourced junior services and much more focus on providing, outsourced more senior services, folks that look and act like SREs and developers, folks who have enduring long-term context and experience. There will always be a role for those people. AI will not replace those people, at least not in the next 10 years. And so I think that the smart GSIs will understand that the bottom of the totem pole for almost every industry, every knowledge work industry, is going to be augmented, but and eventually fully automated by AI. And certainly customers are paying attention. A lot of enterprises are saying, hey, why am I paying 20, 30, 40 million dollars to an outsourcer for L1 operations when agentic AI can do the work, can do it faster, and can do it better, and can certainly do it at a fraction of the cost and can meaningfully increase my margins.
Yeah. And Jason, before you joined BigPanda, you ran IT operations for a well-respected gaming company. And from the perspective of a buyer, what would you add, or what kind of additional context would you provide, and what you see the role of the service provider changing as more of this work gets automated?
When I think back to, we used to negotiate contracts for offshore support, offshore operations support. And they would price us on the basis of an expertise per hour. You get a 10-person staff, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And I'm going to put a database engineer 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. And you would price the contracts in those terms. And that just doesn't make the economics for that completely changed. They had a labor arbitrage where offshoring was much cheaper. I could put some basic knowledge work that was never particularly satisfying in terms of its output, because often the incident tickets would get assigned to the outsource company, and they would reassign them to the domain experts back on our team. So it was always a high friction point, and I was never very happy with the outputs there. But now that the economics have changed, I'm really curious how those service partners are going to adapt, because basically they said, well, we can charge 40% less or 80% less per head of operations coverage. And that is non-competitive with an AI agent that doesn't sleep, that has a ton of contextual understanding and a deep domain expertise around everything. and is priced at the price of an LLM plus running the infrastructure underneath those data sources. Like that is a really tough environment if I'm a service provider. And I'm, as a proud American, I'm really looking forward to the onshoring, the reshoring of all these services back to our companies and really cutting out the middlemen that inserted themselves because there were such differences in the cost of labor. That was always every year you look at your budgets and you get squeezed a little tighter. And there's an OpEx line item for a service provider who's trying to up his margin, and it was always, his sales reps are always increasing their costs. And I would always say there has to be a better way. And now through technology, through AI, there is definitely a better way. And yeah, I'm I'm actually very happy at this prediction and looking forward to how it comes out.
Yeah, it's definitely very exciting. I think we all realize the potential and where the industry is going. But I think a lot of questions people have in the today's moment, like actual, how do I get started today, is what people feel in their gut, and people ask a lot of questions about is how do I actually let AI work on its own? How do I get comfortable with AI making decisions without human input? And Jason, I know this comes up a lot with our teams and with the customers that you're speaking with or prospects. Can you explain the tension that customers are feeling?
Yeah, they have the potential, and they have like kind of a long history of automating various activities. And they try to fit AI into that same very deterministic flow. But AI is fundamentally a different animal. It doesn't act deterministically. You don't set up the rules and then it executes because not everything can be proceduralized. You can't reduce everything that you want an AI agent to do into a series of steps that are always the same. You want that flexibility in its ability to adapt to these specific circumstances for this specific incident at this time in this region with these services. What is the agent going to do? It's going to act intelligently on the basis of the context it has, right? So that's a different animal than automation, which was very predictable and very controllable, very governable. So what changes with AI agents is you want to treat them the same way you would treat a new employee, and that is graduated access on the basis of demonstrated competence. You don't get your new intern from Stanford and put them on your cash cow service and say, "Hey, make this thing run, and also you're migrating it to cloud next week, and I need you to reduce the costs, the operating costs by 50% within 2 months." You don't do that with people, and that's because you know how to govern and manage people. AI agents are similar. You want to put them in a small box initially, get familiar with their constraints, their limitations, and then you want to expand their envelope for operations. And at the same time, you're going to realize, just like you do with people, here's the training they need, here's the context they need, here are the boundaries and guardrails that they need, and I need to set up in my systems to prevent things from going sideways because it's a learning curve that every organization is going through in terms of the way they govern AI agents, the way they set up their data, their access, their permissions. Human in the loop is a very good way to give an agent the ability to do almost anything, but put a human in control. And we learned this. There's a great paper by DARPA from 2015 when we were first kind of coming to grips with autonomous systems. And it introduced the concept of appropriate trust. You don't let an AI or any autonomous system make decisions without first establishing appropriate trust. And that means not too much trust. Hey, this thing will just handle my service operations end to end as soon as I turn it on. And not too little trust where you have to dictate every individual action because that reduces the flexibility of the system to adapt to different circumstances, different scenarios. And so you want to establish that sweet spot. And that's very unique to every organization because their AI agents will be limited based on the context they have, based on the data structures and tools and access and permission to different systems that you've given it. Um, and you'll have to build up that capability. And so it's super exciting, but you know, because you have this brand new capability that you want to bring in and apply to almost everything, but you got to do it in a responsible way. And bounded autonomy, I think, is a great way to frame that because you always put it inside something that you can control, you can roll back, you can turn off, and then you gain as an organization, you gain competence in applying AI agents to any given problem space.
Asaf, I have a follow-up question to you. I just want to, before we do that, anybody in the audience who has any questions for Asaf or Jason, please put them in the chat. Happy to address them for you so we can get to them as we end up the webinar. But Asaf, is there anything that you would add when speaking to CIOs or executives at enterprises when they're thinking about bounded autonomy?
I mean, I guess it would be don't fall into the trap of analysis paralysis where you let your AI counsel try to engineer a standard of perfection that is unattainable and that you frankly don't hold your humans to. Rather, I would say, like, if you have concerns, get started quickly with smaller workloads. I mean, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned for how enterprises migrated to public cloud 10, 15 years ago. You know, public cloud came along, and clearly the economics of public cloud were very compelling. But, you know, what did not happen is enterprises did not say, hey, okay, we're going to shift everything. We're going to retire all our data centers and move everything into public cloud overnight. No, what they did is they say, hey, let's pick a handful of workloads. Let's put those workloads in public cloud. Let's get familiar. Let's show ROI. Okay, now we got some momentum. Let's do it a little bit more. Let's start putting more mission critical workloads in the cloud until they started getting enough comfort and experience to say, hey, we're going to do much larger migrations and also become AI native. I think with AI, it's the same thing. Don't stand there trying to engineer perfection. Just get started with a handful of your environments, you know, put them in AI, make sure you have, as Jason said, you know, an infrastructure for bounded autonomy that, you know, humans can see what the AI is doing, can, you know, have explainability in what the AI is doing and the ability to give feedback. And, you know, with time, you'll see that, you know, this is not voodoo, this is not magic. You'll get much more comfortable. So, you know, my typical advice to executives is get started because your competitors are already getting started. And if you're sitting around for an AI council to give, you know, tops down AI strategy across the business where everything is new and they don't have context, you're going to be 2 years behind your competition. And in 2 years, your competition is going to lap you. And so, you know, get started in smaller, you know, safer environments and get that experience, get that muscle memory. You know, those enterprises that are only now shifting to public cloud, 15 years, only now are they getting the memo, you know, and you can see where they are because their stock prices reflect the fact that they're laggards in the industry. And AI is going to be the exact same thing. You do not want to be a laggard in AI.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciated the insights that you shared in I think our third annual predictions. And I see some questions are coming in. I just want to let the audience know that you can get more information on our website if you want to get our business value of the BigPanda platform report, where we go through the ROI customers are experiencing as they adopt agentic AI. And if you want to have a follow-up conversation with any of us on the sales team, feel free to reach out a form. Okay, I have two questions here that I think are pretty relevant to the conversation for the time that we have left. I think this is a question for you both. So the question here is, we've invested a lot in our CMDB, and I see that they also wrote, we have a lot of rules set up, and it's taking us a long time to even get that going. How big of a project is to get started with Agentic AI? Do I got to boil the ocean here?
Uh,
Jason, thoughts?
yeah, definitely don't try to boil the ocean. Many have tried to boil the ocean, unless you're a volcano, you can't really do that. The ocean's too big. Um, but it's we've just built out the capability to ingest a CMDB into our IT knowledge graph, and it's a starting point at best. It does not contain all the relationships. A lot of it is unusable. The data is never perfect in systems like that because they don't reflect the dynamic state of modern enterprise operations. They never really advanced. And I think that's true of pretty much all the data. We don't even know how much contextual data that AI needs is in systems versus in people's heads. You have across large enterprise hundreds of domain experts on various services, shared services, infrastructure, network, everything else, and and they might, on an individual service basis, they might have 90% of the knowledge required to actually operate that service day in, day out responsibly. And it might not be in any systems. So you can't boil that ocean because a lot of the information, probably 40 to 80%, is stuck in people's heads. And you will never extract it because those people will move on. And people are forgetting some of the things they learned in previous incidents and deployments and every other activity they engage in. So I think the answer is to start building that context layer, start building data sources that are AI accessible and that deal with the diversity of data from structured to unstructured, clean, dirty, where you have a very dynamic actual system in reality. Your data systems are never reflective of that, and so you have to start mapping the unknown areas of your organization and building that map and increasing its accuracy, granularity over time. And the great thing is, once you do get started with that, you get incremental gains at every stage. There is no kind of step function there where all of a sudden you have a critical mass of data and AI becomes useful. No, if it just has a little bit of context, it can be a little bit useful. And that slides up very, very nicely as you build out that context that your organization has. Every organization has its own very, very unique context. And so generic solutions to try to capture that are always going to be limited. That's why vector and graph DBs are such powerful tools now where AI can access that in a way we've never seen any technology able to do that with the fidelity that we now do. Yeah, I would say definitely don't try to boil the ocean and definitely experiment because that's the only way you're going to move forward. And it's pretty cheap to experiment, honestly.
Okay. I think that leads to a next question from Patrick. I'm kind of paraphrasing.
Adam, let me add a little bit to that, if it's okay. I hear that concern from a lot of enterprises. Hey, we just spent the last 10, 20, 30 years, trying to populate a reasonably good CMDB, and we built all these rules-based, automations, and now you want me to, throw all that away and use AI? Like, that sounds awful. And, typically the mantra I use is, this is an evolution, not a revolution. You should not throw away the assets that you have and are working. So CMDB is a really important data repository. It's not that the CMDB is a bad data repository. The problem with CMDB is, it's the sum total of the highly structured data that can fit inside of CMDB is only like 5 or 10% of the context that a human needs in order to get situational awareness. To get the rest of that situational awareness, they have to make a bunch of phone calls, they have to get on bridge calls, they have to look up, historical issues, look up all sorts of stuff that are not inside of a CMDB, and an agent needs to do the same thing. And so keep your CMDB, but over time, start giving access to your AI agents, access to to your CMDB, but also to your other data repositories. That's one. And it doesn't have to be a big bang project. It can be one data source at a time. That's one. Two is, your rules-based automation If those are working well for your known issues, where you've seen these issues before and the fixes are fairly predictable, keep those rules-based automations. But in areas where you have unknowns, that's where you want to bring and layer on, agentic-based, reasoning-based automation. So no one is saying throw anything away. This is very much an evolution where you can start taking baby steps versus this giant 2, 3 year project to boil the ocean.
Perfect. Okay, last question. This is from Patrick. Kind of paraphrasing here. I'll throw it to you, Assaf.
Yeah.
Um, I'm looking to how to get started. It all sounds interesting, and I want to do it. But is there any kind of guidance you have from your customers how they found a use case or how they were able to build the first pilot project?
Yeah, that's a great question. I go back to what I said about kind of think back to, Patrick, to, how did your enterprise get their feet wet with public cloud? They picked a small handful of use cases that where there was a combination of, I'd say, real business pain, visibility by executives, meaning if you brought something valuable, the business would notice, and that it had measurable outcomes. It wasn't just, doing something new and technologically innovative for its own sake, but because it actually solved business pain and drove business value. And so when looking to how do I get my feet wet with AI, find, 1, 2, 3 use cases that someone in power actually cares about, that has pain, that an executive in power will actually stand up and notice if you, A, fix that problem or bring, measurable relief to that problem, and B, that you can measure and articulate the value in dollars and cents. If you want the use case to be noticed, if you want to start a snowball, this isn't, at the end of the day, this isn't about technology. This is about driving value to the business. So if you can save money or improve customer experience or, drive competitive differentiation or velocity, things that the business actually cares about, that's success. And so, find those use cases where you can drive those kind of, value-based outcomes.
Great. Awesome. We're almost at time. I have a final 30-second follow-up question for you to end the webinar. The audience members, if you have questions, please submit them. We'll get back to you. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to them today. Assaf and Jason, 30 seconds. If half of these predictions come through or make meaningful progress this year, what do you think we're going to talk about next year?
Very quickly, I think we're going to talk about next year, fundamental changes to what the org chart looks like for IT operations. 40 years, you've had these kind of hierarchical org charts in IT ops where you had kind of level 1 doing, initial issue detection and deflection, and level 2 and level 3. While at the same time, you've had folks at the application layer kind of working on an SRE type model. I think that as agentic AI starts to really ripple its way through the value chain, you're going to see some pretty meaningful changes in that traditional kind of IT org chart.
Awesome. Jason?
I would definitely agree with that. I think there's going to be a increased focus on iteration speed, RPMs for the organization. IT orgs were not built for rapid iteration, fast changes. And that's going to be a new competitive layer for every business, every vertical. You are going to have to adapt quickly and move quickly because the frictional costs, the labor costs, the development costs, all of those have been dramatically reduced. And in a year is an eternity right now, it seems like. But in a year, those costs are going to be even lower. So you're going to have to build this capability to measure and increase the velocity of change in order to be competitive with your peers. And I think that's going to be that's not something that IT has done a great job of measuring in the past. And I think we're going to have to build a capability to both increase that velocity, but first and foremost, measure it.
Perfect. You heard it here first. Thank you, Assaf. Thank you, Jason. Great conversation. Audience members, thank you for your time. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful day.
Thank you.